crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I am here with the Simon Says Stamp July card kit. This card kit has not sold out yet and is still available. I'm going to quickly go over the contents of the kit, but if you're interested in more about what the kit comes with, you can see it on Simon Says Stamp's website, which I will link to. Basically, you're getting some foam strips, a die that cuts out a bikini, a stamp set, which is called, I think it's called See You Soon. I don't know, but it's also available separately as well. It has a lot of great sayings in it, and then some really large images. You get some sequins that don't have holes in it. They're like a slightly different kind of sequin. You get a piece of transparency paper, just one card size front, sort of 5x4-ish. And then half of the 6x6 Echo Parks, I think it's called Summer Dreams, or something similar to that. It's like summer something. And so you get half of that paper pad, which is enough to make quite a few cards. And you also get some of the Simon Says Stamp cardstock. There are, I believe, 3 colored pieces and then 1 white in the 120 pound. I'm going to use the solid colored pieces of cardstock, more like pattern paper in the sense of I'm going to create with them, not make card bases with them. I am going to do, I think, 11 different cards, but 12 cards in all, because I'm going to make 2 of one. And then I'm going to use white card bases for all of them. So I'm not going to be including the cardstock from the kit as the card bases. I'm going to add to the kit. And I added a couple things to the kit, not too much, but I felt like they were generally basic enough supplies. So like here I'm using yellow ink, and this ink is actually from an old Simon Says Stamp card kit, so if you're a subscriber you probably have this ink. And here I'm stamping, I'm trying to do a monochromatic stamping where I'm stamping yellow bikinis onto a piece of the yellow cardstock, and that piece of cardstock is cut to 4 1/4 by 3. And I'm going to have a coordinating blog post where I talk about some of the measurements, so if you're trying to recreate a similar look or style and you wanted to know what I actually cut the cardstock pieces or paper pattern paper pieces, etc., to check out that blog post. Once I had stamped the bikinis, and it's really hard to see here, and honestly I wind up basically fixing this card later, but I wanted to stamp the sentiment, and I was going to stamp it in VersaFine ink because it gives that really crisp black. You know, it's my favorite sentiment ink. However, I wanted to add a little bit more weight to it in the sense of just like letting the sentiment have a bigger impact because it is a large sentiment. I'm going to do this on a couple of the sentiments, but mostly when I use this particular sentiment that says sending a summer hello. So most of the times that I stamp it, I'm actually going to emboss it. It gives a very slight different look, so if you don't have embossing powder, you don't have to add it to get a very similar card in the end. But I thought, you know, it wasn't too much of an extra supply to add, because I do try to stick pretty close to just the card kit, just so you can appreciate how much you can really make with a very limited number of supplies. So I put the clear embossing powder over the VersaFine ink. Another reason I like that ink, because it is sticky and a pigment ink. You can emboss over it, and you don't have to get black embossing powder, but you can just use clear and use it for, you know, actually embossing clear, but also embossing black. So it makes that ink a little bit more versatile. But once this ink dried, I realized that the yellow was basically invisible on the white cardstock. There wasn't enough contrast and you couldn't see it. So then I took the orange ink that was from that same Simon Says Stamp kit. I believe it was the April kit with the zoo animals, or I guess it's African animals, if I remember correctly. But I stamped it with the orange instead. And that allowed a similar monochromatic look, but wasn't so light that it was basically lost. Then I picked 2 pieces of pattern paper, one that was cut to the sort of like A2 card base size, just under, because I like to leave a white border on mine. So it's 5 1/4 by 4. Then I put a strip of the a different pattern paper. When you cut a 6x6 paper to 4 by 5 1/4, you get a 2-inch strip. That's 2 by 6 inches that's left. And so often I'll take that 2-inch strip and incorporate it onto cards. So that's what I did here. With the one that I stamped yellow on, and like I said, once it dried, it was practically invisible, I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to restamp exactly over wherever I stamped the bikinis because I can't even see it. However, I don't want to waste that piece of cardstock, and I did want it to have a little more interest than just being a big old block of yellow. So I just decided to stamp orange bikinis over it, and if you can notice that there's another layer of yellow bikinis under it, you know, later on, to me that will just add dimension to the card. So, you know, try to save the pieces, and that's going to be kind of my mantra, because there is more than once in this video where I was like, I think I messed that up, I'll make it work. So I'll share more of that. But basically this was the card that I created 2 of, because the first time through it didn't work. I wanted to see if the orange would work, and basically wound up creating a second piece, and then I thought, well, I'll just make it into 2 cards. I'm going to stick with the sending a summer hello and what are you up to sentiments, just because I'm probably going to donate most of these cards, and when I donate cards, they tend to be asking for general encouragement sort of sentiments. So hello cards are great for my purposes. But there are some other really fun sentiments in the stamp set, and there's plenty of times where you could, you know, recreate a very similar card and just substitute the sentiments. So I took one of the pieces of 6x6 paper and cut it into 3x3 squares, because I find that those are pretty useful in creating cards and help me to, you know, when I start with some basic shapes and sizes, it helps me to sort of get my mojo flowing rather than cutting into a fresh piece of paper every time. Sometimes that can be really intimidating. So a lot of times when I get a paper pad, I'll just cut a whole bunch of pieces at one time. And so here I decided to create something really simple. I die cut the bikini out of yellow, layered it on that 3x3 square, and then put it on a about A2 size piece of paper. I thought about creating a couple of those, but I didn't want to use up all my supplies just yet, because that was already the second card I created, and there is a limited amount of pattern paper. So since I really wanted to create at least 10 cards for this video, I thought, well, I'm going to hold off, see if I use those 3x3 squares for anything else, and if I don't, go back and use them and make a few more of that same card, since it was so simple and easy to create, and I could cut the bikini out of the cardstock. Here, I'm working on another card, and this is going to be a shaker. So you see that I cut the bikini out of the blue cardstock, the solid cardstock, and I'm going to use it as the sort of shaker window. And the important thing about that is with the bikini, there's a lot of like little inside pieces, particularly the little tiny bits in the bow. I'm not even going to fuss with that. But I do have to add back in the area that is at the top, you know, between the top of the bikini. So what I did is I glued down my clear transparency, and I'm going to be using my ATG gun throughout this process because it's a really strong adhesive, but I'm also going to be using multimedia matte because that's a strong adhesive that's good for gluing small parts down. Here on the transparency though, I really do prefer to use the ATG gun. And I'll put the bikini back into the die cut area so that it can help me line up this negative piece. And that way when I peel up the bikini, it's exactly in the right spot. I don't have to guess. I can know for sure that it's going to look right. And once I have that in place, I'm ready to actually work with the shaker. This particular card kit is meant to encourage shaker cards. So if you've never tried shaker cards and you want to give it a go, this would be a great card kit for you. They give you some foam tape. Now what I noticed about this foam tape is when you attempt to peel it up, it gets kind of wonky because the foam isn't very thick, which is in some ways nice to have thin foam. There's reasons why you sometimes would want a really thin piece of foam, but it's not very stiff either. So it's really hard to lay it exactly straight, I found. And that, you know, could be user error, but I personally definitely prefer the Scotch 3M foam tape that I own over this foam tape, but I do appreciate that it is much thinner. However, I kind of like to leave the backing on until I'm done like constructing the shaker. So to not be able to do that, because with these, once you pull it up, it starts coming off of its backing paper. And it's really hard to get back on, and it's just, I felt like it was really fussy foam tape, and it wasn't ideal for me. I mean, it works, and if it's all you have, go for it, but it's just, for me personally, it wasn't like a favorite foam tape. But I did create a little box around the bikini, and I chose to put a piece of foam tape between the bikini top and bottom just because I personally wanted to give it a little more stability. I was afraid that if I didn't put a little piece of foam tape there, then the shaker would kind of like get smushed in the mail or smushed in handling. So I thought that would give it a little bit more stability. But you could use a smaller piece or you could skip that, particularly depending on your foam. And I just used one layer of foam, again, because this foam I felt like was a little tricky to work with, so I thought double layering it was more difficult. I found that it was thick enough that my shaker card still worked. Sometimes 2 layers of foam tape is better to get like a really good shake, or to use really thick sequins or beads or whatever you're going to put in it, so you kind of have to depend on your size, but these particular sequins did work well with that foam tape. So I created that simple shaker, and then I'm just going to put it on a piece of cardstock. So I put it on a piece of pattern paper and call it a card. I think it was really cute because of that die. Next up, I am using my Misty to stamp the wave pattern. The wave pattern wound up being one of my favorite stamps from the stamp set, and probably the one that I wound up using the most in the end. And when I was using my Misty, I really liked it because it was easy to line up a bunch of waves in a row and create a simple pattern. And so I wind up using that a couple times. So once I put the wave stamp in the middle, I don't want my cardstock on the edge, because then my wave stamp can't hang off and I can't move the cardstock up and down to create a wave pattern, like a row of waves. So I started in the middle of my Misty, and I found with the Misty matte, in order to get a nice layering row effect with the waves that I'm going to do on this card and a few others, all I had to do was drag the cardstock up or down 2 squares. So it was 2 exact squares, which made it easy, rather than if it was like 2.5, or, you know, like the measurements worked out really well. And so you'll want to keep that in mind when you start stamping. Make sure your cardstock is lined up with one of the grids and in the middle. Then move it up and down to create a pattern. Here I'm working with 2 Lawn Fawn inks. I think it is the Merman and the Peacock, but I would just suggest working with whatever blue inks you have. As I mentioned earlier, I did wind up pulling in a lot of ink colors, and I know that not everyone has access to them, but since I'm doing a lot of monochromatic, like I'm stamping blue on blue, what you can try is stamping Versamark instead. So if you don't have blues, but you want to create something similar, you might use a Versamark, and it will basically just make the paper seem a little darker and therefore look like a monochromatic wave. So just a tip in case that helps for you know, more limited supplies. Here I am going to again stamp the sentiment with some VersaFine black ink. I'm going to again add a yellow bikini because I cut out a few of them from some of the yellow cardstock. I also cut out a bunch of bikinis towards the beginning once I had some scraps of yellow and blue going, because I thought, well, then if I only have to reach to the left to grab an embellishment, I'll be more likely to actually use them. So since the wave stamping had gone so well, I thought, well, let me try the clouds. Part of the difference is the clouds are a lot more of a solid image, and they did not give a good impression the first time on my Misty, or they wouldn't have on a stamp block either, because the ink really like beaded up. And I'm using dye inks, like I said, from Lawn Fawn, and I enjoyed those inks. But for a solid stamp, it can be really tricky. So here I've stamped it, you know, 2 times already, and you might have noticed I stopped and I took a nail file or an emery board and I kind of filed the stamps a little bit, because sometimes that gives them a little bit more grip. But here, after 3 stampings, it's still super, super splotchy. And I know that you can condition your stamps. I've also heard people say take an ink like Archival, or even VersaFine, to basically pre-stain your stamps, and that will help them work a little bit better. And I didn't give it that a try in this instance. I tried the emery board method as well, and I also figured, well, since I'm using my Misty, I'll be able to stamp it a few times. But after stamping it, you know, like 6 or 7 times, you kind of get to the point where you're like over it. I don't know. I guess I'm not a very patient stamper, because I was kind of like, ugh, I don't even know that I like these clouds enough for all this work, and it's still not looking great. But I didn't want to throw it out. I didn't want to give up on it. Partly because I thought, well, I'll just flip it over. They're double-sided pieces of pattern paper. This isn't a piece of cardstock, actually, even though it's solid. And I was like, okay, so I'll just turn it over. But the problem is the dye ink really sinks into the paper, so it's stained the other side. So I would basically have to toss this piece, which I got stubborn and decided I wasn't going to do. So even though I said I wasn't patient, here I am going to go back and actually fuss with this thing. And so now, rather than using my Misty and stamping multiple times, now I'm trying to like restamp in the same exact place with a stamp block, which, like, if you're not patient, that is probably even worse of an idea, because then you have to line it up each time, and if you don't line it up perfect, it becomes, you know, a point of frustration as well. And I've stamped it 3 more times, and it's still not solid, so I'm kind of over it at this point. But I have a solution, so that will be coming out another way to stamp these cloud images and enjoy them, as I'm currently not enjoying them. But I'm going to stamp them a few more times till they get solid enough that I can live with it, and so that I can, you know, turn this into a card. What I'm going to basically do, though, is wind up covering a good chunk of the clouds so that I kind of cover up the not so good stamping that I did. I want my bikini, because I'm going to die cut a bikini, to match perfectly the clouds, because I'm going to again try for a monochromatic look, but I'm going to do monochromatic across the whole card. Whereas other ones I did like the background monochromatic, then added a pop with the bikini. In this case, I'm just going to go monochromatic the whole way. And so I took the same ink cube and I stained that extra 2-inch strip of the same pattern paper that I'm using for the background with the 2-inch cube. And you might think it's kind of weird that I'm working in the center, and that's partly because I could still use the strip if I cut out this center by covering it with, like, say, a 3x3 square. So I basically wanted to still be able to use that strip for other things, whether I use the pink watermelon side or the green side that I'm currently, or blue side that I'm currently working with. And so, yeah, that's the reason that I chose to do it in the center. Then I'm going to glue on the little bikini. I would suggest waiting for the ink to dry or hitting it with a heat gun like I did there, just because the glue will stick a little bit better if your paper is really wet when you go to glue it down. That can be somewhat problematic and cause a lot of warping. So as you can see, I covered a good chunk of the clouds to sort of rectify my stamping issues. But here is the solution. If you want solid image stamping, pigment ink is much better, which I know in general. However, I don't really love pigment ink because it takes a really long time to dry, and honestly, I have used pigment ink that a year later will still smudge and is not dry because it sits on top of the paper. But the new Distress Oxide inks are a mix of dye and pigment, and so they dry, but they give you that amazing coverage of a pigment ink. So they're like, you know, one of, like, as many people in the crafty world are, I'm obsessed with them, and I appreciate how awesome they are because you can do this gorgeous blending, these fun techniques, and then amazing solid stamping. So to me, they are worth the investment. I know some people are waiting for the minis, which Tim has said several times are not coming, so don't wait. But to me, the quality and the uniqueness of the ink is worth the space that they take up and the bigger price tag of a full-size pad. I really enjoy them, and I like being able to do solid stamping again, because for a while there I felt like solid stamping was out for me, because even with the Misty, dye inks don't always give great coverage. And as you saw, because I just did that, even quality inks like Lawn Fawn is great inks, but you know, when you have a really large solid stamp, it gets tricky. So I'm a huge fan of the Distress Oxides, and if you are frustrated with solid stamping like I was a few minutes ago in this video, they'll be a great solution. So I'm using the Broken China Distress ink, and this blue paper is the blue cardstock that was in the kit. Because again, I'm going to use the cardstock more as like panels on the cards rather than as card bases. I stamped the Sending a Summer Hello, and I heat embossed it again onto a different piece of the pattern paper. what I liked about this Echo Park pattern paper is it was a really good mix of simple patterns and then some more bold patterns, but everything was small and made sense for a card maker. And there was a couple of patterns, like this is an actual pattern sheet that you can stamp a sentiment on and still read it. And sometimes that can be really hard to find pattern papers that where the sentiment's really readable. And so I enjoyed that good mix of different kinds of patterns in one paper pad. And it's a little bit of a different style than, say, the Doodlebug pads, which I also really love, but are, definitely a more cutesy style. So here these are slightly more grown up. Maybe they'll be perfect for the teenagers in the program that I send cards to. And if you're looking for any information about sending cards, donating cards, in the video description towards the bottom, I have a whole bunch of links, and one of them is to my card drive resources page on my blog, which gives you different places to donate cards, and I now have some international, non-US places to donate cards, so hopefully that's helpful. For my next card, I decided to keep it simple, crazy simple. This piece of Echo Park paper, to me, was perfect, gorgeous, stunning, love the color blend and the sunlight in the corner, and I was like, I don't want to cover up this pattern paper. It's one of those pattern papers that, and this is probably sounds silly because it's such a simple pattern in some ways, but you want to just frame on the wall, just call it a day. But I'm not going to do that because I have paper hoarded in the past, and eventually there's just too many of them. And so I'm going to use this pattern paper and enjoy its beauty, but I'm going to keep it simple so that the paper really is the star of the show. And I'm just going to stamp this sentiment and the 3 little birds from the stamp set. And so they look like they're sort of flying away. And I'm going to put that sentiment where the rays of the sun are directed. So I'm choosing purposely to put it in the bottom left corner just because your eye will be drawn to where the rays are shining down. And so that'll really work out well for this particular card. And I'm just going to heat emboss the sentiment and the birds. Just keep it really, really simple. And I think that there's honestly a couple of pattern papers in this collection that you could do something very similar with, just because whoever designed this paper is a genius and makes gorgeous paper. Although I think that's true about way too much pattern paper if you're anything like me. But I also did decide to do a simple bit of corner rounding on the bottom. That's one easy way to give a card a slightly more finished look when you keep it simple like that. Next up, I'm getting towards the end of my 10 cards, and I'll be honest, I'm beginning to sort of run out of ideas. And I don't think it's because the kit is limited per se. I think it's just because I personally wind up challenging myself to make 10 different cards with one kit in about 24 hours, which can be hard. Whereas if you came back to this kit maybe a week or so later, something might pop into your head that you wouldn't have thought about the week before, or you could have time to mull it over. Because I received this kit 24 hours before I started the video, and then made all the cards in 24 hours. So I haven't had much time to stew on it per se. But I'm going to stamp with that orange ink again from the old Simon Says stamp kit. I'm going to stamp 3 waves this time, and I'm going to do a landscape card as opposed to a portrait. I'm not going to do the alternating inks. But again, that reminder, if you feel like, you're adding a lot of stuff to the kit, what if we don't have this ink? Try Versamark, because I know that's in a lot of people's collections because of the embossing abilities with Versamark, and that will give you a somewhat similar look. So earlier, I did blue background paper with the yellow bikini. Now I'm going to do blue bikinis on the yellow paper. And I wound up with a couple of different sets of the bikinis, partly from making that shaker card earlier and partly from just cutting them out of scraps or smaller pieces so that they have a purpose. And basically what I'm going to do is kind of line up a bunch of bikinis across the card in a little bit of a wonky pattern, just to sort of fill that space, just so that I'm not just gluing another bikini in the corner. Make it a little bit different. I'm going to glue them down really well, and then I'm going to turn the cardstock over and trim it off. I find that to be a little bit easier rather than trying to line things up perfectly, and I think that things look better if they're kind of hanging off the card just a bit rather than perfectly ending each time. I'm going to make another shaker card because again, this kit is meant for shaker cards. And so it does require me to add another additional thing because I'm using an oval die to create that. But I kind of come down to the fact that if you don't have an oval die, if you're more limited in your supplies, you could definitely trace something to a circle or an oval and do something pretty similar. But I also think a lot of people probably tend to have those. So I'm going to take a look at how this pattern that I made the oval is, or cut the oval from, works with some different papers. And I definitely recommend that when you're trying to use a bunch of the pattern paper from the same collection. Sort of play around, pair them up, because they generally all look good together, but sometimes you'll find one that you like even better. And if you think, well, they use that dark blue on the back here of that same sheet, it stands to reason that the side might coordinate better, because the designers are thinking about these sort of things when they're making the cards. So using this lighter pattern paper that I die cut the oval out of with a darker pattern paper will present that nice high contrast that looks great. And you will see that pattern paper through the hole. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to use this foam tape that was included in the pad. I'm going to create a rectangle perfectly sealed on all sides so nothing falls out. I'm going to reinforce it with some extra foam tape just because it is a pretty large space that I'm creating there, and this foam tape is, as I mentioned, a touch flimsy. I feel like it's softer. I don't know how to describe it, but I use a EK Success powder tool there just to try to relieve the static a bit. It doesn't do a great job, probably because I didn't put enough powder down, but it does help things shake a little bit better. I'm going to pour some of the sequins from the kit, because you can see they're already sticking to the plastic. I'll pour some sequins of the kit onto the pattern paper in the center, then place my shaker down on top of it, push it down so it's really sealed on all sides. And then that's the simple shaker part. I thought about leaving it there, but it says, "What are you up to?" And there's no water things on this card. There's just the Ferris wheels in the background. So I was like, probably need to add something else to it. And now I'm thinking I probably didn't show you what I added to it. But I just put a different solid pattern bikini on it. Sorry, solid, not solid pattern. Anywho, I cut some more bikinis out of some of those strips of 2-inch paper, and as you can see, I put two 2-inch strips paper through the die cut machine at the same time so that I save some time on die cutting. Even wafer thin dies can usually go through 2 pieces of pattern paper at a time, no problem. So I recommend that as a little tip for saving, you know, just a touch of time if you're going to do a bunch of die cuts. Like here, I wanted to cover almost the whole background in the bikini, so I knew I was going to need a few of them. I wind up cutting, I think, 6 sets, but I don't know if I use them all. So we'll see in a second. This is, remember I made that card earlier, super, super simple with just the sentiment because I adored the pattern paper. Well, here's the extra 2-inch strip of it, which again, because I love that pattern paper, I'm going to use it, not hoard it, which is the key that I've learned over the years, is to use what you love, because you'll get some, I don't know, in some ways I think you get more enjoyment out of it. So I'm going to cut that into a banner, and then I'm going to put it on this white striped paper. It's kind of like a whitewashed wood paper. And I liked it because it's pretty neutral, because I'm going to be putting a lot of the patterned bikinis on top of it. So I thought about using just a piece of solid cardstock, but I really wanted to continue to use some of the pattern paper from the kit, because like I mentioned before, I'm getting towards the end of the, 10 or 12 cards that I'm going to make, and so I really want to make the most of my kit and use up some more of that pattern paper and not hold any of it as precious. So I'm going to start by gluing down one of the bikinis and sort of making a judgment about how far do I want to put the top and bottom from each other, because I'm going to use that throughout throughout laying them across, because I'm going to basically try to be creating my own pattern paper essentially. You might prefer to completely cover the background and then lay down the sentiment so that it looks like the whole piece is really covered, because in my case, there's not going to be any bikini pieces off to the right there, and so it doesn't really look like a true pattern paper. But I honestly thought that I like this way better because by making the bikini just off to the side of the sentiment, I made the background and the bikinis more of a focal point of the card. I didn't want them to completely fade into the background. So to stretch the die cuts a little bit more, when I glued down that bikini bottom, I was able to cut off a bit of it. from the, like overhang the card. So I cut off that bit, and I'm not going to just toss that. I'm going to take that little piece and put it somewhere else on the cardstock so that I'm, it gives the illusion of cutting more of them than I really did, yet I didn't have to do all that extra die cutting or have all that extra pattern paper. So most of this bikini top is hanging off. Again, I'm just going to trim it, and I'm going to glue that rest of that bikini top somewhere else. And hopefully that makes sense and is a helpful tip when you don't have as much of a supply or you want to. And in some ways, I find that like to be a time saver, because then you don't have to cut out as much. Not that it takes that long, but you know what I'm saying. And you have to use less pattern paper, so that's always good since you have a somewhat limited supply in the kit. So I finished covering that with the bikinis, and I'm on to my final card. And again, I'm going to stamp monochromatic waves because apparently I'm obsessed with them. Like I said, it's kind of wound up being my favorite stamp. I'm going to mix it up very slightly and put the wave in the center instead. But I'm going to use the pink that was also from the April kit, so the same one that the orange and yellow is from. I'm going to use that one. And you could, again, use Versamark if you don't have it, just to give it a try, but really any old pink ink will do. Sorry, I just tapped the microphone. And again, move it over 2 blocks on your MISTI in order to get that perfect placement of the waves sort of interlaying with each other. Start in the center of your MISTI so you can move the card to the left and right. And one of my big recommendations with this card is, again, when you're trying to place things, starting in the center is easier. If I tried to start with the top wave and then center everything up, that would be much more difficult. So I'd rather start with the center wave and then stamp the 2 waves on the top and bottom. I'm going to line up 3 bikinis. Same thing. If I glue down the middle bikini first, it's going to be more likely that the bikinis are actually centered in the end. And also in this case, I kind of thought about it ahead of time, and I noticed the bikini bottoms are a lot wider than the tops. So I'll want to glue the bottoms down first, because if I glue the tops down, I might glue them so close together that I have to overlap the bottoms. And not that you couldn't do that, but that's not what I was going for. And so whatever amount of space I put between the middle and the right one, I'm going to put between the middle and the left one, so that they're coming out very similar. And I'm also looking at what is overhanging, because the bikinis actually, the bikini bottoms do overhang. And so I'm going to make sure that I'm not cutting a bunch more off one side than the other so that they, again, look centered, even if they're not perfectly centered. You could use a ruler and measure and then, line up bikini bottoms, but I can't be bothered to fuss with that personally. I've eyed it up well enough, I suppose. And so they'll glue on the tops. And here are my cards. Again, I believe there are 12 cards, but these 2 are pretty much the same. And honestly, a lot of the ones that I stamped with the waves were pretty similar, so I felt like I wasn't giving you enough ideas, and so I included an extra card. And you can see the fun shakers and a lot of the really bright, bold colors. I thought this was a really, really pretty summer palette. I really enjoyed working with this kit, and that song, Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Polka Dot Bikini, was like stuck in my head the whole time, as I'm sure it will be for anybody making these. But yeah, it turned out really fun. However, I know personally that I'm not going to use these stamps a ton, and so I'd like to give an opportunity for these to get a new home. So I'm going to be selling my stamp and die, and I'll give you the extra bits of foam tape there, since I have plenty of foam tape in my collection. And so I will be selling all 3 items for $17 shipped. So that's quite a bit cheaper than if you were to buy these separately. You don't get the whole kit, obviously, but if you really enjoyed just those particular items and didn't want to, purchase them full price or pay extra for shipping, so $17, including shipping to the US, of course. So, US. That's it for my video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. I hope you get some fun inspiration for this kit. And if you ordered this kit, that you really enjoy using it like I did. I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. I do these kit videos regularly. I do 6x6 paper pad tutorials and lots of other fun stuff on my channel. And there's links in the video description, so you can check me out on some different social media. You can check out my card class if you enjoyed my teaching style, though it's much slower. And this is pretty fast, these cards. But I have a card class with big picture classes as well. And yeah, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you taking the time to view the video, leave comments, and if you could share it with your friends, that'd also be super awesome. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye.